So Yoshi-P and CBU3 are currently working on some unannounced projects, and in today's video we're going to try and figure out what could those projects be and what they're most likely not going to be. So if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button, you can subscribe and leave a comment, and if you want to keep up with my videos as they come out, you can click that little bell notification as well. Doing any one of those things really does help out the channel so much, and I greatly appreciate it. So as Yoshi-P is making the rounds doing media and press for Final Fantasy XIV Dawn Trail, he let it be known that they're working on some unannounced projects. And this comes to us directly from Audrey on Twitter, where Yoshi-P has said that CBU3 are working on 2 unannounced games. So what could those games be? Well, I think it's a given that one of those games 100% is going to be an original IP outside of Final Fantasy. And Yoshi-P and Michael Christopher Koji Fox have given interviews within the past year or so that really allude to them being ready to move on and do something that is more lighthearted and original. And I personally really want to see that. You know, having covered the development of 16, it sounded like it was a really stressful and arduous project for Yoshi-P, and he was also, you know, still doing Final Fantasy XIV at the same time, and I think maybe it kind of burned him out a little bit, and he really sounds like he's ready to do something different. And I really want to see that. I want to see what CBU3 can do outside of the realm of Final Fantasy. What original IP could they create? And could it be more lighthearted? Because 16, it is a much more mature story, but it is very dark and heavy, and those themes can kind of weigh down on you pretty heavily. So doing something that's a complete 180 I think would be really refreshing, and I really want to see what they can do off of the leash of Final Fantasy. So I'm really excited for that. So that leaves one other game. So what could that other game be? Well, I think we can scratch off Final Fantasy 17, and that's for a number of reasons. Assuming Square Enix is planning a Final Fantasy 17, they usually overlap their Final Fantasies, meaning when a new Final Fantasy is getting ready to come out, they're already putting together the team that's going to make the next one. And that's how it happened with Yoshi-P and Final Fantasy 16. As Final Fantasy 15 was getting ready to release, the previous CEO of Square Enix, Yosuke Matsuda, called Yoshi-P into his office and said, "I want you to make the next Final Fantasy." And Yoshi-P did it under the caveat that CBU3 could join him. So they were putting together that team right as 15 was getting ready to come out. And if Square Enix is still kind of doing that same model, then another team most likely would have been contacted to do 17 as Yoshi-P and CBU3 were putting the finishing touches essentially on 16. So I think that kind of rules 17 out. And I think that also kind of rules out CBU1 because they got their hands full with Final Fantasy VII Remake. They just finished Rebirth, and now they've already moved on to doing Remake Part 3. So it's a coin toss on who's going to do 17, assuming they even do a Final Fantasy 17 in the near future. Hello everyone, future Curious Corduroy here, who is currently editing the video. I came across another article where apparently Yoshi-P has walked back the sentiment of not wanting to direct the next Final Fantasy by saying, yeah, he wants to direct the next mainline Final Fantasy. So I thought I would just throw that in here really quick, because apparently he's changed his tune, which he has a habit of doing from time to time. But yeah, it looks like 17, I guess, could potentially be an option now, because he does want to direct the next major installment. So curse you, Yoshi-P, for making me have to make edits to my video when I thought I was finished. Resuming the video now. Now, what could the other game be? Well, I think there's 2 possibilities here. One could be the remake of Final Fantasy Tactics, which has been rumored for a very long time. I believe it was included in the NVIDIA GeForce Now leaks that took place like 80 years ago. But there's been some slight movement here and there coming out saying that, yeah, Tactics Remake is in development. Now, I don't know if Yoshi-P and CBU3, again, would have been able to do that because it would have overlapped with the development for 16. But I do know that in terms of like overall maturity and themes, Tactics is kind of close to 16. It's a much more darker tale, and I've only played a little bit of Tactics on the Game Boy Advance, so I'm not as familiar with that. So people who have played Tactics will have to let me know in the comments if you could see like 16 being very similar to Tactics in terms of its tone. So that is a possibility, but it would overlap a little too much with the development of 16. Now, what could the other game be? This one is a little bit more likely, and that is the remake of Final Fantasy IX, which again, much like Tactics, has been rumored and floated around for a very long time now. There's been some industry insiders that have said, yeah, FF9 Remake exists, I've seen it, and it's not a full-on remake on the level of Final Fantasy VII Remake in that project, but it's also not in line with Crisis Core. It's somewhere in the middle, so it kind of sounds like it's going to be the best of both worlds. It's going to have a little bit of a budget on it, but it's still still gonna look and play well, but have that high quality nature to it, which is, really reassuring. And there have been some rumors coming out recently in regards to the status of Final Fantasy IX Remake. Now again, we take these rumors with a grain of salt because they're rumors. We don't know how true they can actually be. But allegedly, Square Enix outsourced the development for Final Fantasy IX Remake from the get-go. But they weren't happy with how development was turning out on that game, so they took it away from whatever studio was working on it and brought it in-house, so that way Square could work on the game and develop it internally. Which, if that is the case, that's a Final Fantasy VII Remake situation, because initially when FF7 Remake was announced, Square Enix outsourced that project to CyberConnect, which was a developer that was really known for their action games. And Square Enix looked at the project and they just were not happy with the direction that was going either, so they pulled that away from CyberConnect as well and just brought it internally for CBU1 to work on. Now, why Square Enix would think that it's cool to outsource a remake of a mainline Final Fantasy is kind of beyond me. Those are really precious titles, regardless of what the quality is and what the budget's going to be. You'd think they would want to keep that stuff internally instead of just handing it over to another studio to work on. That just seems a little too risky in my opinion. But it is known that Yoshi-P really loves Final Fantasy IX, and they've been incorporating elements of Final Fantasy IX's world into Final Fantasy XIV with things like Solution 9. So it is possible that Yoshi-P and CBU3 are working on the remake of FF9, and apparently that game is pretty far along and it could potentially get announced sometime this year. There's even rumors that the Xbox Showcase might have Final Fantasy IX Remake in it. And you're probably wondering, well, what about overlap? We talked about overlap earlier in the video. Well, it kind of depends on when Square Enix brought 9 back in internally. If they brought it back in sometime last year, then Yoshi-P and CBU3 would have been putting their finishing touches on 16. So it's possible that they could have had a skeleton crew finishing 16 and then CBU3 moved over to Final Fantasy IX or vice versa. And I know that we talked about Yoshi-P and the crew kind of being ready to move on from Final Fantasy, but this is Final Fantasy IX. If Yoshi-P is a fan of it, he's probably going to jump at the opportunity to do the remake and to really just put all that love and care into it. And again, while 9 does have mature themes and it does have its darkness, it does have a lighter tone overall compared to something like Final Fantasy 16. There's no beheadings, there's no chocobos being murdered, there's not blood everywhere. It's mature in its own way. And if it does end up being Final Fantasy IX that they're working on, then that game will come out relatively soon probably, and that would allow Yoshi-P and CBU3 to resume work on whatever that other original IP would probably be. Now, another game I want to mention real quick that I don't think it is, I've seen some people hope that it's this game, but it just doesn't seem realistic, and that's Final Fantasy VI Remake. A lot of people at Square over the years have been, internally asking, when are we remaking 6? When is that going to happen? But there's been some interviews done with the developers saying that doing a remake of 6 would probably be even harder and take even longer than the remake project for 7. With 7, they had that added benefit of a world that had those 3D pre-rendered backgrounds and character models, so it was a little easier to rebuild that world for a next generation, whereas Final Fantasy VI was all pixel art, so you'd have to reimagine how that would look in a 3D setting, the characters, the locations, the world map, what kind of battle system would you do, abilities, all of that stuff would take a long time, and the cast of 6 is pretty big, bigger than 7 by a few characters. So that would just be an incredibly momentous task for anybody at Square Enix, and that would probably be a project that multiple studios in Square Enix would have to work on if they wanted to actually do that. So either way, there's a lot of stuff happening at Square Enix. There's the restructuring, so again, I don't know if they'd even want to work on Final Fantasy 17 at this moment after all the restructuring that's been going on. Although Final Fantasy is still a big IP for Square, it's still one of their tentpole hero franchises, so I would assume that they want to get the ball rolling on a 17 as soon as possible. But all eyes are pretty much on Final Fantasy IX Remake at this point. We're just kind of waiting for it to come to fruition and be announced and be a real boy. With that being said, that is the video. Let me know in the comments down below. What do you guys think Yoshi-P and CBU3 are working on? Do you really think it is Final Fantasy 17? Do you think it's more likely going to be Final Fantasy IX Remake? Let me know down below. And is there a game that you want them to work on that I did not mention in this video? I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.